Right, so I'm introducing myself again. So I'm Vishal Singh from Aalto University. The Lean group is fairly new to me, so my research typically is in building information modeling and design thinking. So my research is typically around design thinking and computational thinking. But during this period, I've had the opportunity to discuss with a lot of colleagues around Lean. And I've had my own reservations about some aspects of Lean, so which got me into reflecting on why those issues were there. And I've so far avoided it, but then I realized avoiding is not the way to go. So I decided to come into the conference and present my views, and hopefully we'll develop on that. So what I'm going to talk about is over there, and it's a propositional paper. So it's in a very early stage. It's still formulating the ideas, but I believe there's an opportunity for us to look at things differently given the context in which we are working. So I'll go to the motivation first. So why comes from this part. So there are, if you look around, there are a lot of reports at the moment in terms of future of construction. There's a lot of excitement about new technologies. A lot of technologies are maturing at the same time. So you have drones, we are talking about 3D printing, and several other technologies, right? And so that's one side of the story. The other side of the story, which again, all the, if you look at the white papers and all the reports, they talk about Lean driving the future as well. So broadly, we can say these are two dominant trends that are going to lead to the future. In the same sense, we have okay, yeah. Oops, it took me elsewhere. I'll probably go there. Okay, so in the same sense, we have parallel developments going on in terms of new ways of working. We are looking at radical changes in terms of service-oriented thinking. We are seeing where traditional industries that were very solid in the way they were organized, for example, taxis and hotel industry, they have all been changed drastically. So there's a good reason to believe that we will see hopefully similar things happening in construction as well. So are we prepared for that? So that's where some of that is going. And in general, because of all these changes happening across, in society as a general, we have expectations of disruptive change. There's expectation from the construction industry as well. So even if you look around, for example, in Finland, we have about 150 to 200 startups every year, all within construction, technology companies, and so on. So disruptive change is somewhere on the horizon. We are expecting that, but are we really into it? Is Lean really supporting that? That's the question. The other side of the story is, if you look at Lean construction, by definition, it seems to be focusing on the construction phase, but that's not the case. We are talking about Lean design management. We are talking about the extended life cycle. So Lean construction has moved beyond the construction phase into design phase and into the later phase as well. From that perspective, there's an opportunity now to revisit the existing theories. And the reason is, okay, I should have gone to this, but I'll maybe, so this is very briefly, I'll go through that. So this presentation and this paper is also based on critical review, a bit of adaptive reasoning, and some thought experiments. So I tried with my group, and we have been doing it for some time. We have tried to look at whether can we adopt the Lean methodologies and come up with disruptive ideas, and it's really difficult because this entire cycle of continuous improvement does not necessarily allow you to make paradigm shifts. So you have to make a paradigm shift before you can do the continuous improvement. So you have to, when you want to make a jump, you can't do it through just continuous improvement. So that's basically the overview of the research methodology. So we haven't followed any other methodology as yet. So if you look at the current condition, the entire Lean theory is based on production, right? So it's a production theory, which only is half the story, because if we look at the entire supply chain, we have the second part, which is the consumption part. So we need to go beyond this production theory. There is increasingly greater focus on customers. It's already clear for the last 15 years or so, even in Lean community. We have been talking about Lean project delivery systems. We have target value design. All this talks about customer as the center. And there's greater focus on design itself, right? So we have now Lean design management. However, there's gaps. So I'll talk about those gaps now. So the first part is, if we look at who's typically pushing the Lean construction at the moment, so it's typically general contractors. The moment general contractor is in, it means that physical production is assumed. Your starting point is that you are going to physically produce something. That may not necessarily be the case. So think of a case where we need accommodation in a particular locality. Let's say in this region, we need accommodation for tourists, right? So if a general contractor comes in, they'll come with the idea of building a low, let's say you're doing a low budget accommodation, right? So you're building a low budget hotel. Instead, you could have now an Airbnb as an alternative, right? But if you start, which uses an existing thing, but moves into a service-oriented thinking. But you start with this production in mind, you're already constraining yourself in terms of alternative solutions. So, so the point here is that in an era where service-oriented thinking is increasing, where we are looking at new business models, just looking at production point of view does not necessarily lead you to where you'd like to be, right? So we have to explore wider design space. The second part is that if you look at the current lean design management methodologies, they are based on operative view of design. So we talk about how many design solutions were generated. We talk about set-based designs, but we do not necessarily talk about the process of designing. How do designers come up with design? That's not there in the lean design management methodology. So that comes in design research methodologies, which look at this cognitive view rather than the operative view. I'll explain that a bit more in detail in the next slide. And as I explained earlier, the lean methodologies explain this continuous improvement very well, but when it comes to radical innovation or radical transformation, it's very difficult to justify or explain them with this current methodology. So we have this need to start looking at expanding our understanding of lean theories to this wider space as well. So these are some initial propositions I have based on analysis of certain aspects. So if we look at lean research, we primarily talk about PDCA cycle, which is again which explains the design cycle as well. So it's plan, do, check, act, of course, but it's an operative thing. So when you talk about plan, do, check, act, it's activity-based, which can be observed. So it's activity-based, observable, and trackable. And that is what we like. We like to measure, we like to observe, and that's why it works well in this lean community. If you look at the design research community, the same design iteration is explained in terms of exploration, generation, evaluation, communication. These are cognitive activities which are difficult to, now if I say I'm exploring, I'm thinking ideas, how do you measure that? How do you even evaluate whether this session that I'm going to have is going to be productive or not? And that's probably the reason we have avoided that in the lean community, but thinking and decision making is core to any activity, right? So we can't neglect that just because it's difficult to measure. So we have to bring that into this as well. The second part I already mentioned, again, radical exploration quite often comes from problem reformulation. So instead of a company coming and saying we want another low budget hotel, you would say, you talk about the functionality that we need accommodation. So you reformulate the problem differently, and that will lead you to different solutions. And that's a very common method in design research, even in design, creative design methodologies. I'm not sure how many, brainstorming I'm sure everyone is aware of. There are other methodologies like trees, which is theory of invented problem solving, and there are many other creative design methodologies that are there in the creative design research area, but it's not there in the lean design methods. So we need to expand this into that space so that we can explore and bring in this idea of problem reformulation into our design process. The second part is then the new technologies are creating new opportunities. And we are seeing that even in these conferences where people are talking about, in the parallel session, we are talking about how IT can enhance lean. So we are already talking about new opportunities being explored. But if you look at exploration of new opportunities, it quite often means that it's a sort of very explorative sort of approach, which doesn't necessarily follow a very structured methodology, right? And that is not very well explained in our current lean methods. This exploration is very well explained in the creative engineering design methodologies, but not in the lean design methodologies. This idea of experimentations and explorations. So therefore, one of the things that I would like to propose is to start looking at missed opportunity as a waste. And that also is applicable to some of us here. So we come here at this conference, we get some new ideas, and then if we don't do anything with those ideas, we would waste that opportunity, right? Just as a very simple example. But that applies to all the issues when we talk about technology adoption or methodology adoption. if a company or if an organization knows that they can improve, but they are just not doing it for whatever reason, we could consider that as a waste. And the reason I would like to emphasize this is because the communication is an extremely important part of making change. And people need to realize and start identifying these as waste as well so that they adopt these new opportunities. This is particularly important because when I talk about the need to bring creative design methodologies into the lean design methodology, we're already talking about exploration. Exploration will give you new ideas. And if you're creating new ideas and new opportunities, we should be able to exploit that. And that is something that would be interesting. The second part, of course, is these new tools, new methodologies that are coming are giving us new opportunity. If we don't jump onto them, then we are missing those opportunities, and we are creating waste there. This missed opportunity is much more significant for the construction industry as compared to, say, manufacturing industries, because manufacturing has traditionally been constrained by the fixed assembly or production systems. So if you are building a new factory, once you have created a system, it's very difficult to change your assembly line, right? So you are stuck with the production system that you have chosen. Typically in construction, we have been very agile. So we have the possibility, even within a construction project, to change our production system midway if we provide something interesting. And similarly across projects, which is not available to manufacturing. So we should be able to exploit the uniqueness of construction in a way that we could benefit from. So that's the other reason why we should start looking at missed opportunity as a waste. And there have been similar ideas earlier. So people have proposed ideas like not speaking or not listening as waste. So it kind of missed opportunity subsumes that. I was very quick, but we can have a longer discussion. Right, so I would like to conclude here with some of the points that I made. So the first point, of course, comes from the title itself, that we need to start looking beyond production to start looking at consumption. We need to have a wider view of the spectrum. That will offer us more opportunity. It will help us look into product service systems rather than just products. It will open us the possibility to look into areas of service-oriented thinking. The second, of course, is when I propose that we need to start looking at lean consumption, at some point, it's a work in progress. We need to start making clear distinction between what lean consumption is and how is it similar or different to, say, sustainable consumption and circular economy and all those other concepts that are around there. I have some ideas on that, but it's still in very early stage. The third, of course, is it requires now integration with creative design approaches. I think we need better interaction with the design research community, because I typically attend conferences in design research, and I don't see anyone from construction there. I mean, I'm talking about engineering design research. That's over the last 10 years. I've hardly found more than 2-3 people sitting there, and that's something we need to do better. We need to have more cross-disciplinary attendance in conferences as well. The second, of course, I talked about is we need to now look at have a more comprehensive view of design and design management. There's some work that has started in that space, but we need to combine this operative view of design with the cognitive view of design, because that would lead us to a more wider design space and a great exploration of the problems. And then we need to, of course, as I talked about, we need to start looking at missed opportunity as a waste and see whether it leads us anywhere. And lastly, we need to start looking at the underlying theories that we have in lean construction at the moment and see whether we can account for paradigm shifts and problem reformulation, which is not explained in the current methodologies. I have another paper where I've submitted elsewhere, which should come out in 6 to 8 months, which starts to discuss some of that. I'm happy to discuss that in the discussion session. Thank you.